Autumn 1874. Harrow Ridge, Wyoming Territory. The wind had teeth that morning. It came in fast off the hills, tore through the cottonwoods lining the dried creek bed, and pressed against the sod house like it meant to peel the roof clear off. Eliza McCrae stood with both hands braced against the doorframe, watching the wind chase dust down the road where no one ever came anymore. The silence out here could gnaw at a soul. Worse than silence was the echo of 5 small voices trying not to ask if supper was coming. She pressed her palm to the old scar on her hip, just under the edge of her bodice. The ache was back. It always came with the cold. The last time she'd felt warmth was spring, just after Jessie died and before the last cow was sold for flour and candles. Now there was nothing left to trade except her dignity, and even that was thinning. Behind her, the house was still. Her eldest, June, had taken the younger ones to the barn to check on the hens. Eliza should have felt relief at the quiet, but she didn't. The quiet now only meant one thing: hunger had turned obedient. She stepped off the porch and down into the brown grass, her boots sinking into a crust of frost. There was no real path to follow, but she moved east toward the rise where she could see the road, what passed for one, just in case. It wasn't that she expected anyone. It had been almost 2 months since a wagon passed through. The post rider stopped coming 3 weeks ago. If the world was ending, no one had bothered to tell Harrow Ridge. She reached the rise and stood there a long time, her skirts snapping in the wind. Her hands, raw from milking and wood splitting, hung at her sides like forgotten tools. The wind pushed against her spine as if urging her forward, but she didn't move, didn't cry, didn't speak. She just stood there, hoping God might notice. There had been no burial marker for Jessie, just a mound of stones she and June laid with shaking fingers. The baby had still been at her breast, too young to understand the weight of death, too weak to thrive on grief. He had died at 35, same age as Eliza now. The irony tasted bitter. What killed him wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation of small disasters: the blizzard that froze their late calves, the fever that came in on the water, the loan that never should have been signed. The day before he passed, he'd taken her hand, said her name like a promise, and told her she'd make it, that she was stronger than she thought. The next morning she fed the fire, held the baby close, and tried to believe him. Now, 8 months later, the promise felt like a joke. She didn't feel strong. She felt hollowed, worn to the edge. Her children had grown too thin. The hens weren't laying. The last sack of cornmeal had weevils in it, and she'd spent 2 hours picking them out by hand. Down the hill the wind shifted. She turned her head, eyes narrowing. A shape moved out beyond the fence line, just a shimmer at first, too distant to make sense of. Her heart kicked. Then she saw the slow roll of a rider, steady as a tide. A man on horseback coming from the east. She didn't move. Not yet. She squinted into the wind and waited as the shape resolved into something real. Tall in the saddle, slouched like he'd been riding a long while. His horse was dark, dust-caked, with a limp in the right foreleg. The man didn't wave, didn't look around, just kept coming. Strangers meant trouble more often than not. But there was something in the way he rode, deliberate but not threatening, like he didn't expect anyone to notice him. Eliza's breath caught in her chest. She pulled her shawl tighter and stepped down the hill without quite realizing she was doing it. Something shifted in the air. Not hope. Not yet. But the quiet inside her cracked just a little. He stopped 10 yards from the porch and dismounted slow, like every muscle in him hurt. The horse let out a low grunt, sides heaving. Dust clung to the man's coat and his hat was drawn low over his eyes. He didn't speak right away, just let the silence hang while he untied something from the saddle, a small bundle wrapped in faded canvas and bound with rope. Eliza didn't step forward. She held the edge of her shawl in one hand and watched him the way a wild thing watches something bigger alert, half ready to run. "You, the woman, keeps this place?" His voice was low, dry as split timber. "I am." He nodded, not surprised. "Name's Luke Carr. I was headed north, but ran into a washout near the Powder River. Your place was the first roof I seen in 3 days. You're lost." I was. Not now. He didn't ask to come in, and she didn't offer. They stood in the open like that sun crawling higher, wind pressing against them like a third presence. He finally set the bundle down on the edge of the porch and stepped back. "Traded a man in Crowell for this," he said. "Thought you might make use of it." She looked down. Beans. 2 sacks. A side of dried venison. Salt. Coffee. Her throat tightened without warning. "I've got nothing to pay you with." He shook his head once. "Didn't come looking for payment." She studied his face, what little of it the hat didn't shade. There was nothing soft there. He was lean, unshaven, older than her by at least a few winters. His eyes held that dry weather stillness like someone used to walking alone. June came out onto the porch, then holding her youngest brother by the hand. The boy clutched a piece of wood shaped like a horse, eyes wide. Luke looked at them without flinching, just gave a short nod. Eliza cleared her throat. "We don't take in strangers. I don't stay where I'm not welcome." Another beat of silence passed. The wind lifted her skirts, tugged at her hair. She felt her voice rising from somewhere farther down than pride. "There's a lean-to behind the barn. If you need a night." He tipped his hat, not like a gentleman, but like a man who'd learned to show respect, even when it wasn't offered. "That'll do." She watched him walk the horse around back, his steps slow, deliberate, tired. A man like that had seen things, maybe lost things too. That night, after the children were in bed and the wind quieted to a low hum, she sat by the stove and watched the kettle boil. Her body ached from work, but her hands shook from something else. Not fear, not even curiosity. It was the kind of ache that came from being seen after months of feeling like a ghost in her own skin. She poured a small cup of coffee, added the last pinch of sugar they had, and stepped outside into the dark. No lantern. No words. She walked across the cold dirt, stars sharp above her, and left the cup on the edge of the lean-to. Didn't knock. Didn't wait. Just turned and walked back toward the house. "The fire's still warm. Subscribe and stay close." Morning came hard. A gray, bone-deep cold settled in overnight, and the stove had gone out. Eliza woke to the sound of boots scraping on packed earth, slow, even steps outside the kitchen window. She pulled her shawl close and looked out. Luke was splitting wood. Shirt sleeves rolled, jaw clenched. He moved like a man who didn't need thanks to know what needed doing. The pile beside him was already growing neat and high. June noticed first. "Mama, he's working." Eliza said nothing. She stirred the pot on the stove beans from the sack he'd brought and listened to the rhythm of the axe. Part of her wanted to go out and stop him, tell him they hadn't asked for help, that they'd managed before, but they hadn't, not really. They'd scraped by on prayers and pride, and both were wearing thin. By midday, the lean-to was cleaned out and shored up, the roof patched. He'd fixed the hinge on the barn door without being asked. She watched him from the porch, arms crossed, suspicion and something else tight in her chest. He worked without hurry, without looking for her gaze, like he had nowhere better to be and didn't mind it. At supper, he knocked once on the doorframe and waited. Dirt streaked his forearms. He looked like the land itself, dusted and dry, but strong in a quiet way. "Got any use for a hand at supper?" She nodded once. "We eat plain. I'm used to plain." He sat near the stove, separate from the children but not ignored. June handed him a tin plate, and he thanked her like it mattered. The boy with the wood horse crawled into Eliza's lap and stared at him. Luke gave the boy a crooked smile and said nothing. After the meal, she set a basin near the stove and filled it with warm water. He washed his hands, slow, methodical. "You're good with tools," she said. He shrugged. "Good with fixin', bad with stayin', never took to settlin' much." That surprised her more than it should. The way he moved through her world, it was like he'd always been part of it. She hadn't noticed how much she missed that someone who knew when to pick up a chore without asking. "Where were you headed?" "Montana. I had worked there once. Figured I'd try again." She watched the way he dried his hands. Not fast, not careless, as if time wasn't something chasing him. "And now's now. Snow's comin', horse won't make it far." The truth hung in the air. He'd stay for a while, long enough to be useful, long enough for her to start wondering what kind of man stopped for a woman with 5 mouths to feed and nothing left to offer but a fire, a roof, and tired hands. That night when she walked past the lean-to, she found the coffee cup rinsed clean and set back on the porch. No words, just the quiet rhythm of something starting to grow. The days took on a shape, not soft but steadier. Luke rose before the sun fed the chickens, before the children were dressed, and hauled water from the well without being told. He fixed the broken rail on the porch, cleared the chimney flue, and laid new traps along the ridge to catch rabbits for stew. Eliza kept her distance at first, not out of pride but protection. A woman couldn't afford to need anything from a man who might leave when the trail dried or the snow softened. But something about his silence wore at her. Not cold silence. Not the kind Jesse used to wield when he was angry and wouldn't say why. Luke's quiet was gentler, more like space he was offering so she could keep her footing. She started letting him walk with her to the edge of the property, past the line of dead cottonwoods that marked where the creek used to run. She'd walk with a pail for kindling, and he'd carry the rifle slung over his shoulder, always watching the hills. Coyotes had taken a lamb the week before. Since then, he didn't go anywhere unarmed. "You married?" she asked him once after a long stretch of walking in silence. He shook his head, came close. Too close, maybe. She waited. He didn't explain, didn't shift the blame to her or anyone else. Just let it sit there like a saddle he'd carried too long. "And you?" he asked, careful. "I was. She picked a burr off her skirt and let it fall. "Jesse died last winter." "I'm sorry." She nodded. "So am I." He looked at her, then really looked, eyes shaded under the brim of his hat, something old and unfinished behind them. "You miss him?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. The air smelled like frost and sagebrush, and the grass crunched underfoot. "I miss the life I thought we'd have," she said finally. "I miss not being so tired all the time." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Later that week he helped her patch the roof. The work was hard, hands cold, but they moved well together. She passed him nails without needing to be asked. He held the ladder steady when she climbed. At one point she slipped on a loose board and caught herself on his arm. Her hand stayed there a beat too long. He didn't flinch. That night she lay awake, listening to the wind scrape at the windows. Somewhere in the house, a child coughed. She rolled onto her side and stared at the empty half of the bed. She didn't know what Luke wanted. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a place to ride out the storm. But every day he carved out a little more space in their lives, in the barn, in the chores, in the quiet dinners where he said almost nothing but always listened. And when the baby cried at night, he never looked annoyed, just sat with his coffee near the stove, warming his hands while she rocked the child back to sleep. Winter hadn't lifted, but it had settled, become something they could face together. Snow came in late November, heavy and wet. It buried the fence posts and turned the trail to town into a white silence that swallowed sound. The world shrank to the house, the barn, the lean-to. Eliza kept a fire going day and night, though the woodpile was shrinking faster than it should. Luke hunted when he could, but game was thinner now. The rabbits had gone deep and the deer had moved east. Still, no one went hungry. One night, as sleet rattled the windows, Eliza caught Luke showing June how to mend a torn seam on her coat. He'd threaded the needle without complaint and held the fabric gently, calloused fingers moving with slow care. June watched him with open admiration, the kind only a child gave when she sensed someone was solid. He noticed Eliza watching, said nothing, just kept sewing. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Eliza lingered near the stove, pretending to fuss with the kettle. Luke leaned against the doorframe. "You're good with them," she said. "They don't ask for much," he answered. "They shouldn't have to ask at all." He nodded. "You've done right by them." She wanted to believe that. Some days she did. Other days it felt like she was holding back a flood with a broom. He crossed the room and sat in Jessie's old chair, the one that creaked when it leaned back too far. No one had sat in it since the funeral. "You think you'll leave when the thaw comes?" she asked. He looked into the fire. The light caught the lines near his mouth, the gray at his temples. "I told myself I would. But now." He hesitated. "I've never stayed anywhere longer than I had to. Don't know what it'd look like to stop." Eliza sat across from him, arms folded against the chill that never quite left her. "What are you running from?" He smiled, but it wasn't amusement. "Too many things to name. A war, a brother, a girl who didn't wait." She let the silence sit between them for a while, the way he always had. "I'm not asking you to stay," she said finally. "I know. But I also ain't asking you to go." Luke looked up at her, and for the first time she saw the weariness beneath the quiet. The longing tucked behind every careful gesture. He wasn't just running. He was tired of running. "You got a life here," he said softly. "I've got pieces of one," she said. "The rest I'm still trying to build." Something passed between them then, not spoken, not fixed. Just something known. That night, when she brought in more firewood, she found the door to the lean-to open. The wind was high snow, drifting fast. Inside, the space was empty. For a heartbeat, her stomach dropped. Then she saw it, the saddle still on its rack, the horse stabled, and his coat hanging on the peg by the door. He hadn't gone. Not yet. The next morning he was at the table before the children woke. Shirt damp from chores, hair still wet from snowmelt. Eliza set a cup of coffee in front of him without speaking. He took it with a nod, hands cupped around the tin like it was something precious. "Mended the fence," he said. "Best it'll hold till spring." She sat across from him. Her hands were rough red at the knuckles. She had stopped wearing rings after Jessie passed. They were in a box now, tucked away with the folded clothes no one had touched since the funeral. He looked at her, then away. "You've been alone a long time," he said. She didn't correct him. "I have too," he added, "even when I wasn't." The stove cracked, let out a small pop. "I ain't got much to offer," he went on. "No land. No name worth carrying. No sure path. Just these hands and what I can build with them." Eliza swallowed hard. There was a lump in her throat she hadn't expected. Not fear, not hope. Just the ache of being seen. She didn't reach across the table, didn't touch him. Instead, she said, "My children need a roof. Warmth. A man who doesn't break things just by being here." Luke nodded slowly. "I don't break easy." "That's not what I meant." "I know." He set the coffee down. His voice, quiet as snowfall, filled the small room. "I ain't asking for anything. Just saying, if you needed someone to ride alongside you, not ahead, not behind, I could be that." Outside, the wind pushed against the house like it wanted in. but the fire held strong. She rose to refill his cup, the gesture simple but not small. When she turned back to hand it to him, her eyes didn't waver. "You can stay through winter," she said. He took the cup, fingers brushing hers. "And after, we'll see what the thaw brings." Neither smiled. There wasn't need for it. That afternoon they worked side by side, stacking what little wood was left, planning how to make it last. The children played in the snow, laughing for the first time in weeks. That night, Eliza unlatched the box in her room. She didn't put the ring back on, but she held it in her palm a long while before closing the lid again. Something was shifting. Not fast, not loud, but sure as spring under ice. January brought sickness. It started with the boy, her youngest. Fevered and pale, he whimpered in his sleep, too weak to cry. Then came the cough, deep and wet, spreading to the twins by morning. Eliza worked without rest, spooning broth, cooling foreheads with snow-packed rags, her own hands trembling from exhaustion. Luke didn't ask what needed doing. He split wood by lantern light, rode 3 miles through storm-heavy hills to fetch willow bark from an old MT's woman he knew out past Widow's Draw. He came back half frozen, one side of his coat ripped where a branch had caught him. He didn't complain, just handed her the bark and asked where she needed him. They moved like parts of one machine, passing water, lifting blankets, whispering words too soft for the children to hear. On the 3rd night, the oldest girl, June, stood in the doorway, her small frame swaying. "Will he die?" she asked. Eliza turned to Luke, but it was he who stepped forward. "No, ma'am," he said gently. "He's still breathing. We hold on to that." She nodded, trusting him more than she should. When the fever broke, it broke for all of them. Like a thread holding everything taut had finally gone slack. Eliza sat on the floor beside the bed and let herself fall asleep against the wall, legs outstretched, apron wrinkled, face lined with days of worry. She woke to a blanket being draped over her. Luke crouching, slow, eyes soft in the lamplight. Their faces were close, too close for pretense. "You saved us," she murmured. He shook his head. "You kept them alive. I just did what I could." Eliza reached up, not thinking, brushing his sleeve with her fingers. "You could have left," she said. "I almost did." "Why didn't you?" His jaw tensed. "Because I wanted to stay." That truth settled between them, simple and unadorned. No promises. No sudden declarations. Just a choice. She leaned her head against the wall again, heart slow, breath steady. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you." The next day, the children ate real food. June helped stir the pot. The boy kept the carved horse close, tucked under one arm, even while he slept. Luke fixed the broken latch on the pantry, mended a boot with wire, looked more at home than he had any right to. When night came and the wind pressed against the house again, Eliza didn't check the lean-to. She knew he was still here. By late February, the light changed. It came earlier, stayed longer, casting a softer hue across the frozen ground. Snow still covered most of the yard, but the hard edges of winter were dulling. Calmer winds, brighter skies, and with them something in Eliza began to uncoil. The children were stronger now, color back in their cheeks, laughter rising easier in the evenings. Luke had built them a small sled from leftover fence wood, and the twins dragged it up and down the slope behind the barn until their mittens soaked through. Eliza watched from the porch, arms folded, breath pluming in the cold. Luke stood beside her, sipping coffee from the tin cup she now handed him without thought. "You ever picture this?" she asked. He tilted his head, not looking away from the children. "This peace, laughter, a quiet place." He was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think those things weren't for men like me," he said. "Then I figured maybe it wasn't about what a man deserves. Maybe it's about what he chooses when the chance comes. She glanced at him. And what you chosen? His grip on the cup tightened slightly. I ain't running any more. That was all he said. But it was more than enough. The next morning, the old pastor from Crowell showed up on a borrowed mule boots, muddy beard rimmed with ice. He came to check on them, he said, after hearing of sickness and hardship. Eliza served him tea by the stove. Luke kept to the back room until she called for him. Is he staying with you? The pastor asked quietly once they were alone. He is. You trust him? She didn't blink. Yes. The man gave her a long, knowing look. Folks might talk. They already do. He smiled at that. You've got steel in you, Eliza McCrae? When Luke came back into the room, the pastor studied him with narrowed eyes, but he didn't ask questions. Instead, before leaving, he turned to Eliza. If you need anything, a word spoken, a vow witnessed, you know where to find me. She nodded. I'll let you know. Luke didn't speak until the mule's hooves faded down the road. You thinking on it? He asked. I've been thinking on it since you fixed that first fence. He chuckled low and warm. Then I should start building something more permanent. She raised a brow. Like what? Whatever you'll let me. That night, as the children slept and the fire crackled low, she brought out the old wooden box. This time, she didn't just hold the ring. She slipped it on her finger, held it to the light, then set it gently beside Luke's coffee cup. I love Jesse, she said, but I'm not trying to bring him back. I'm trying to build something new. Luke nodded once. Then let's build it. The thaw came slow, creeping in with pale mornings and a wet softness underfoot. Water ran in thin rivulets beside the barn. The snow receded like a tide, revealing bent grass and earth scarred by months of cold. Eliza moved through her days with steadier steps, her breath no longer tight in her chest. The worst had passed. One afternoon, while the children chased each other barefoot across the muddy yard, Luke came in from the shed with a long wooden beam slung across one shoulder. He set it down gently near the side of the house. What's that for? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Roof beam, he said, for the room I'm building. She blinked. Room. For me. He met her eyes. If I'm gonna stay, I ought to do it right. Eliza looked at the beam, then at the side of the house where the sun hit just right in the morning. She pictured the wall opened up, the smell of fresh timber, a space made not out of need but out of want. I don't need you to build a room to prove something, she said. I know, he said, but I want to. She stepped closer. The smell of sawdust clung to him. She reached out, brushed a fleck of it from his collar. I've never had a man ask before he took up space. I ain't ever stayed long enough to build any. There it was again, that gentleness under all that grit. It cracked something in her chest, but it didn't hurt. Not this time. By April, the new room stood. Simple. Square. Strong. Luke taught June how to drive nails, showed the twins how to measure without losing count. Eliza laid the first plank of the floor herself. She didn't speak while she did it, just pressed her palm flat against the wood and closed her eyes. The pastor came back in May, this time on foot. He brought a small book worn with age and stood under the open sky beside the barn. The children watched from the porch. June held the baby, who now clapped at birds. Eliza wore a dress she hadn't touched since Jesse's burial. Luke stood beside her in a clean shirt, hair combed, flat boots polished with lard. No one cried. No one made grand speeches. When the vows were said, Luke simply looked at her and said, "Thank you." Eliza took his hand. For what? For letting me find a home I wasn't looking for. That night, as stars blinked out over Harrow Ridge and the fields softened into green, she lay beside him in the quiet. The children slept soundly. The fire burned low. His hand found hers under the blanket. "You ever think about leavin'?" she whispered. "Sometimes," he said, "but only to remember why I stay." She smiled in the dark. Outside the wind was calm. The creek, long dry, whispered again beneath the thawing ground. The house no longer felt like a place of endings. It felt like a beginning. Ride forward with us. Subscribe for the next chapter in the dust.